No, we started small. We have a couple
Okay.
that are under 100. What we've learned is in order to get the economies of scale and manage these things profitably, the sweet spots, yeah, between 150 to 200 homes, that also allows you to have an amenity that has a swimming pool, a clubhouse, some common space. That's not to say that a 50 home community doesn't work, particularly if it's closer to a city, right? To a CBD, a central business district. Obviously, it's hard to find land to have a 250 home subdivision. So a smaller community will work, but the general sweet spot, if you will, particularly for suburban, is around 150 to 200 homes for those reasons.
Welcome to CREPN Radio for influential commercial real estate professionals who work with investors, buyers, and sellers of commercial real estate coast to coast. Whether you're an investor, broker, lender, property manager, attorney, or accountant, we're here to learn from the experts.
Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio. Thanks for joining us. My name is J. Darren Gross. This is a podcast focused on commercial real estate investment and risk management strategies. Weekly, we have conversations with commercial real estate investors and professionals who provide their experience and insight to help you grow your real estate portfolio. Today's interview is sponsored by Building Insurance and Risk. When you invest in real estate, it pays to work with a real estate investor protection specialist to protect yourself and your investment from catastrophic loss. The experts at Building Insurance and Risk focus on real estate investor protection. They provide you with multiple insurance coverage offers and a side-by-side coverage comparison. To learn more, go to buildinginsurancerisk.com. Today, my guest is Richard Ross. Richard is the CEO of Quinn Residences. Quinn Residences is a leading institutionally backed owner, operator, and developer of dedicated rental communities in the southeastern United States. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with Richard Ross about about investing in 2025. But first, a quick reminder, if you like our show, CREPN Radio, there are a couple things you can do to help us out. You can like, share, and subscribe. And as always, we encourage you to leave a comment. We'd love to hear from our listeners. Also, if you want to see how handsome our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. You can find us on YouTube at Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And while you're there, please subscribe. With that, I want to welcome my guest, Richard Ross. Welcome to CREPN Radio.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm glad you're here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. But before we get started, if you could just take a minute and share with listeners a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I've been in real estate just over 30 years, and both public and meaning working for public companies and private companies. My initial experience has been as a financial guy. I was a CFO of a real estate company, two real estate companies for many years, and then started the Quinn business just over 5 years ago. So been around for a couple rodeos.
Got it. So in the history of your work history, have you been in different asset classes, different strategies for different companies?
Yes,
Yeah.
I have. I've been in multifamily, right, apartments back in the early 90s, and then again in 2013 to 2015, also in grocery anchored shopping centers, so the retail asset class. I don't understand office, so I've tried to keep away from office. Obviously, that served me well here recently with the pandemic. So primarily residential and retail. Also did
Got
a
it.
bit in cell towers, so I know enough a little
Oh,
bit about those as well. Vertical real estate.
yeah. No, there was a time when that was when that was a booming. I'm sure it's still a market there, but that whole thing when it was new, getting cell towers, that was
Yeah,
hot
one of the
stuff.
largest public companies today is actually a cell tower company. So there you go.
Yeah, I used to. Just out of college, I worked for Motorola, and we tried to sell the equipment to people that had cell towers. So that was good. So anyway, that brings us to today. Quinn, uh, and we talked just before we hit record a little bit about the model. Um, can you kind of give us a quick overview of Quinn and how you guys are set up?
Sure. We were formed just over 5 years ago, literally a couple of months before the lockdown and the pandemic. And the business plan was always to a fairly new real estate concept, and that is we build entire communities, subdivisions, if you will, of starter homes, 3 and 4 bedrooms, where the entire community is for rent. So picture a suburban subdivision, $350,000 home, suburban Atlanta, suburban Raleigh, Charlotte, Central Florida. That's where we operate, but this is being done all over the country. And it's a 200 home subdivision with a pool, a clubhouse, and each home's for rent, professionally managed. That's what we do. And
Got
we've
it.
since we started this have uh, we own just over 5,200 homes across 34 communities in 5 states.
Got it. Got it. So I'm curious with your experience in multifamily and now, I mean, is this still considered multifamily or is single family rentals?
It's a good question. It's sort of a hybrid. So multifamily, as you know, has been around for decades, really since World War II when it got popular. And then single family rentals, which is SFR, kind of became popular out of the GFC, right out of the Great Financial Crisis when homes were being foreclosed, and there were a couple of 2 or 3 big companies today that acquired thousands, hundreds of thousands of homes during that period of time and rented them. That's what we call a scattered site model, meaning they would go into a neighborhood and they would buy 300 homes. And these are vintage 20, 25 years old. They rehab the homes and then rent them out. That was sort of the genesis of the SFR business. What we're doing is what we call build to rent, BTR, where we're building these entire communities, brand new homes. So it's not multifamily, it's not apartments, and it's not what we consider SFR or scattered site. It's kind of in the middle. Think of it as an apartment building that you break into single family homes and manage them that way. So again, we only deal in 3 and 4 bedroom homes. These are brand new homes. Over the last 5 years, as I said, we've accumulated over 5,200 homes.
So I get the concept of the subdivision. Uh, First thought, are they all single lot deeded properties or is it one master community?
Great question. It depends. We started early in the business with all what we call individually platted lots, right? So each home is its own tax bill, right? Property tax bill and its own plot. Of late, in the last 2 years, we've started to morph into doing more commercial or one single plat for the entire community, all 250 homes. That helps with zoning because then if you get rental zoning, it applies to all the homes in the community. What's happened over the last few years is the individually platted communities begin to get contested by some municipalities as to whether we can rent those homes or not. So it depends, but I would say our portfolio today is primarily individually platted. Going forward, meaning each home is separately platted. Going forward, we'll probably be moving more towards a more multifamily where all 200 homes are on one single tax parcel.
Right. And I would think that that would then kind of lock it into that's the use, unless I guess eventually, the market changes and somebody comes in and buys it and subdivides or does a plot line adjustment or whatever and uh, does all
Yeah,
that.
and for a lot of smaller investors, and really when we started, that was the attraction, right? If the rental market collapsed or you couldn't operate these things profitably as a rental, you could always sell them as one-off, retail, if you will, to home.
Hmm.
It becomes harder, right, if it's a multifamily designation, but it can be done. You just have to subdivide it back out.
Right. So the as far as the operations go, it seems to me you've got basically all the same things you would if you had an apartment complex from a standpoint of you've got lawn care, property management. Are the utilities, are they all metered individually or is it all one master meter?
So you're right. That's the multifamily, how much we're like apartments, right? Yes. All the utilities are in our name. That makes it easy when a resident moves in and out. They don't have to go to the utility company and get the utilities in their name. We just bill it back to them, kind of similar to an apartment. We pay all the property taxes. We maintain the property, so we mow all the lawns, fix toilets if they're stopped up. So the operations in that regard are very similar to what an apartment would do. And several of our communities, we have solar, which obviously provides a benefit to the resident as well. We put a pretty extensive technology package. That's the beauty of having brand new homes, right? For rent, is you get all of the more recent technological and energy efficient things that you wouldn't get in an older home.
One from a CapEx standpoint, I mean, new is new. You've got at least a runway there before anything starts to
Yeah, and
explode or
that's another beauty, right? Is first of all, you got a warranty on for the first year on the build from the builder, whoever. We don't build the homes, we hire third-party professional home builders to build the homes. And then your appliances, right, typically have a 5-year or 10-year warranty. So you do have a lot less CapEx, particularly in the early, the first 5 years, than you would buying an older rental home.
so as a an appreciation thing, I feel like, single families, it's your house is worth what your neighbor's house is, give or take. Just based on if it's sold for this, there's a good chance if yours is like size condition, there's a buyer at a similar price when when the market's balanced. For multifamily, you're looking at it more from an NOI standpoint.
Right.
Is that kind of the same model as when you guys go to market or to sell? Is that what the
It is, right? It's kind of a hybrid. To your point, a sophisticated buyer will look at a community. Let's just take an example of 200 homes, and they'll, as you say, take the NOI, figure out what that is, adjust it for whatever things they adjust it for, and then put a cap rate, if you will, on that, and that's the value of the property. What can also happen is, particularly in a smaller community, if it's 50 homes or even smaller than that, 10 homes, is they will look at what the comps are, what a house next door or down the street is selling for, and value it that way. Um, the municipalities have taken primarily the approach of that, meaning when they assess our property taxes, they say, okay, your home is next to a home that sells for 450,000, so that's what we're going to assess your house on. So it's still in flux as to how these things are valued, but moving more and more towards a multifamily valuation, which is taking the NOI and applying a cap rate to it.
got it? Well, and so you've been doing this for 5 years, you said, right before
Yep,
the
just over.
okay. So have you had any properties go full cycle, or is your model buy and or build and hold, or what is your
So the long-term business plan is to build, own, and operate these properties because you're trying to get your investor return, or we are, not so much on appreciation, but on the cash flow, right? Because over time, that's your best return on investment. Having said that, you always want to look at a portfolio, right? And take, I don't know, the bottom 20% of your properties and monetize them and recycle that capital into new properties. So we are in the process of selling two of our early deals, and both of those are going to be sold to public companies that are in this business as well.
got it? And as far as your financing, as a developer, and you guys are you coming in at ground up, or any utilities, or is there
Yeah, no,
anything?
we our process is we will not buy unentitled land, but once the land has been entitled, right? So a developer has bought the land and got it entitled for single family rental homes. Then we can take over. So we have bought raw entitled land and funded all of the horizontal, then the vertical, and all of the construction and lease up. We have a very, I would call it a bespoke credit facility that allows us to do that. We entered into that about 2 years ago. When we first started out, it was sort of one-off construction loans, right, with a regional bank, just like a home builder, any other home builder would do. And as we got to scale, we were able to avail ourselves of a little bit more holistic credit facility that allows us to buy the land, fund the construction, fund the lease up, and then you have different leverage points, right? Until a property is what we call stabilized, right? Which is about 85% occupied and cash flowing.
So does the financing, is it construction and permanent, or do you then refi once you've got everything
Well,
built
the
up?
beauty of this credit facility is there's different buckets. There's a bucket for land, there's a bucket for construction, there's a bucket for lease up, and then there's a
Okay.
bucket for completed homes. The typical structure, right, is you would go to a regional bank, get a construction loan. Once the property is completed and well on its way to leasing up, then you would go, the agencies, right? The Fannie and Freddie are doing loans on build to rent communities now. That's a fairly new thing in the last couple of years. So you can get some pretty attractive financing using the agencies, or now life insurance companies, your typical long-term financiers, a 10-year loan are doing that. We haven't had to avail ourselves because of our size, but if you're a smaller investor, that's typically what you would do.
Yeah. So you mentioned 200-ish is a kind of a round number as far as a community. Are all of the communities you've done, are they 200, or is there a range
No,
in
we
size?
started small. We have a couple
Okay.
that are under 100. What we've learned is in order to get the economies of scale and manage these things profitably, the sweet spots, yeah, between 150 to 200 homes, that also allows you to have an amenity that has a swimming pool, a clubhouse, some common space. That's not to say that a 50 home community doesn't work, particularly if it's closer to a city, right? To a CBD, a central business district. Obviously, it's hard to find land to have a 250 home subdivision. So a smaller community will work, but the general sweet spot, if you will, particularly for suburban, is around 150 to 200 homes for those reasons. We have
Got
some
it.
large as 350, just,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, as I say, so this is this basically when somebody drives by, is there like a sign, the community, like a, Stonebrook, or, is there a, like a, is it a named
Yes,
community?
we typically will name our communities all just like a home builder will, right?
Okay.
Vista Lakes, and then we brand them a Quinn
Okay.
Residence right below
Okay.
them. So people know this is a Quinn
A Quinn.
community. And obviously, they can go on our website and see the map and all the communities. But we do brand it, and there's a sign, that encourages them to come in and check it out.
Got it. So tell me about the tenants that your typical tenant. Are we talking, I mean, these larger homes, so I'm assuming families,
So
is
we
that
call them residents, Darren.
okay? Okay.
Just
I'm sorry. Yep, you're
no,
correct.
that's
Residents.
okay.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I'd say that because my staff, my team will, I berate them if they
Yep.
call it tenant. Um, so our demographics, our average age of a resident is 38 years old, so a little considerably older than most apartment dwellers, if you will. We have residents that are in their 50s and 60s, but the average is 38. They have about 1.4 children and twice as many pets, so 2 to 3 pets,
Right.
which is not surprising. All of our communities have fenced backyards and typically a 1 or 2 car garage, depending on the size of the home. Um, so that's the demographic. We have so a lot of our residents don't have children, just by doing the math. If it's 1.4 children, and that's either young millennials, Gen Zers, if I've gotten my math right, my terminology right, who both have a job, they want a home, they like the space, they like the no maintenance lifestyle, all the way through families with kids, school age children, to a decent percentage of empty nesters, um, who don't want them. Again, they want the no maintenance lifestyle. They want to be able to sort of lock and leave um, the house and go visit grandchildren and things like that. So it's a pretty wide range of resident profile. Our incomes are 5x rent, pretty much, which is pretty high. I think the
Like,
standard
yeah, like that.
multifamily is like three, you know.
Yeah.
So that's another indicator of the strength of this business.
What's the average length of stay that you're seeing so far?
So we're 5 years in. The average length of stay, I would say, is about 3 years. For others, some of the SFR, big SFR companies who've been in this big business longer, again, it's a different, those are the scattered site. They will push, they're pushing 4 years. Um, I say this because my experience has been once a resident fills the garage, it's interesting. People don't use garages to park cars. You drive through one of our
Right.
communities on a Saturday, the car's in the driveway, and the garage is a gym, it's a playroom, it's a storage unit, a fitness facility, whatever. So once that garage is filled, people don't really want to move. The other thing we're finding is we've adopted a 2 and 3 year lease program. So people can sign up and fix their rent, for 2 or 3 years, a small sort of inflation bump at the anniversary every year of the lease. And that's been very successful to keep residents in the home. And the residents like that because they know, okay, I'm here for 2 years, I'm here for 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that was always the thing. I mean, I've got single families and I've got smaller multis, and you know the the single family they tend to kind of nest. They get in there and kind of like it's kind of become a part of the community or neighborhood, and once you said, like you said, the garage is full. It's they just I don't know. There's a pride in it, but there's just a sense of this is home kind of thing, and there's a little bit more of a willingness or want to stay there as opposed to like the multifamily. It's kind of like it's temporary. It's known that it's temporary when you first sign up. Um,
Yeah,
and
I
I
mean, you bring up, sorry to interrupt, you bring up a
yeah,
great point. When you drive through one of our communities, there is pride. I mean, they have flower baskets hanging in the front. We don't do what a lot of multi folks do and some of the other operators. If they want to put a playground in back or a vegetable garden, more power to you because that again gives them a sense of home, a sense of community, which makes them want to stay. And as you know, having been an owner operator, um, keeping the heads in the beds, as we say, lowers your turn costs. Um,
yeah.
you don't have vacant units. Anytime somebody moves, you have to, at a minimum, paint, and we don't put carpet in any of our homes, so we don't have to recarpet. But to your point, if you can make the resident experience positive and feel like a home, they stay longer, and that helps your operating margin.
Well, I'm kind of curious. What's your thought or experience with you know, the, I've never figured out the math on this, so I'm going to kind of fumble through this question. But my experience is with the single families. If somebody stays there, 5, 8, 9 years or whatever, it's pretty much I don't say a redo, but it's not just a paint and, put the sign out for rent and get it rented again. There's usually some wear and tear and stuff that just has to be addressed, and it's kind of a longer list versus like an apartment unit where somebody was there a year, maybe 2 years. You might have a little bit of holes here and there or whatever, but pretty much a you know, paint, clean, go kind of thing. And I just as a landlord perspective, uh, I recognize and appreciate the pushing the rents on the multis because there's a certain amount of turnover you want because once somebody nests there too long, then it's like a a complete redo, whereas you might be able to get by with a lighter, uh, you know,
Turn,
hands-on
yeah.
kind of thing. And so I'm kind of curious because if you have, I mean, you're starting with brand new to begin with, so that's you're miles ahead of anybody that starting with an older property. Do you have any kind of experience
Yeah,
or
I
insight on
mean,
that?
we're early in this, right?
Yep.
Darren, sorry. We're, 5 years in, so and folks are staying, but I don't know that we've had anybody. I guess we've had a couple that have stayed 4 years, but they're still there. We do a couple of things at the front end. First of all, we are in the home 4 times a year. We require that we change the HVAC filter. It sounds innocuous, but that gets one of our maintenance guys in the house
Yeah.
4 times a
Eyes
year.
on. Yeah.
Yeah, eyes on, is there 8 dogs living in there chewing up everything, or are there 10 people living in there? So that's one thing. The other thing is we build these homes durable. As I said, there's no carpet. It's all solid surface, kitchen countertop, solid surface flooring. Our stairs, there's no carpet on the stairs, which is a huge wear. We put two coats of very good paint. I won't name the brand so we don't get a commercial for them, but we put high quality 2 coats of paint as opposed to a builder who just throws, cheap paint. So
Right.
that when the person does move out, it's a lot less cost and time to turn the unit. Having said that, yes, after 5 or 6 years, you're probably going to have some appliance replacement. You're going to have to paint the whole thing, no doubt. Um, and hopefully, over the time of those 5 or 6, 7 years, your rent has increased enough to keep those reserves in place. We haven't hit that point yet, but it's a good topic.
No, I'm just kind of, to me, it's interesting because it's, the people renting, but there's probably an excitement about being in a new home, having a little bit of space between you and your neighbor. You're not hearing what's going on upstairs or next door, kind of thing. And just that little sense of space, I would think would be kind of an inviting, more so than perhaps, an apartment where they may have come from. And so, is there any kind of when you guys are plotting where to build, what are some of the considerations that you look at? Is it more about a path of progress, or is there anything more
Yeah,
that you?
great question, Darren. We when we started the business, our buy box, if you will, what we looked for were three components. The first and foremost is jobs. Are we close to the employment center in whatever area we're considering? Because people got to work to be able to afford rent. So that's sort of number one. If you're going to have five things, that's number one, two, three. Second consideration early on was was schools, proximity to schools. Can they get to schools, and are the schools a decent reputation? What we've learned over the last 5 years is, as I said, not all of our residents, and actually just a small percentage, have school age children. They may have young children, 2 years old, so they're not going to school. So we kind of put schools third now and moved into second place what I would call proximity to retail. Can they get to the grocery store? Can they get their nails done? Can they get to, a Dock in the Box or the Walgreens? That has become a really strong number two. And we have several communities where our folks can walk to the grocery store. And that's a huge amenity. What our residents tell us, the first two things they want is a garage and a fenced backyard. They want on-site maintenance. In other words, if the toilet stops up, they don't want to have to wait 3 days, to get that taken care of. And then they want to be able to go to the grocery store and get their nails done without having to drive 20 minutes. So you mentioned the path of growth. That's sort of a push and pull, right? Land's cheaper the farther you are from the central business district, but if you're too far out, you're too far out, and you don't get people
Yeah.
who are willing to commit, or you're 20 minutes from the grocery store instead of a 10-minute walk or a 5-minute drive or bicycle ride in some cases.
So I'm curious, and you having retail experience might know the answer to this. Is there a community size that a retail with an anchor grocery store needs in order to, really do well or at least,
Yeah, I mean,
survive?
these grocers today are very sophisticated, very
Yeah,
sophisticated. So they will not build a grocery store until they know with some certainty. Obviously, it's not perfect, but with phones and heat maps and tracking, they pretty much know if they open a store in suburban Charlotte, I'm just going to make it up, how big the community needs to be to support that store. And I know one or two operators who can tell you within 5% what their first year sales are going to be. We look at that. So when we want to locate in a community, we'll look at the number one or number two grocer in that general area and say, okay, how far are we from that grocery store? And that will inform us as to the desirability, if you will, of that particular site because they're much more sophisticated. I mean, Target's perfect example. Target doesn't build a store unless they know they're going to do well. And most of the
right,
grocers
right.
don't build stores. Same with Walmart.
Yeah,
So,
they're not just going to go out and, throw the dice. I get it.
yeah.
So, it just is, I look at what you're doing. I mean, you started with 50 home communities. Now you're, 200 or 350 or whatever. It seems to me like the logical next step would be to buy enough ground where you could have that you control that center of retail and then, and maybe not you, but just in that, the way to scale it kind of thing. So you have, and I'm kind of curious too, is there a a limit, or is there any kind of thought on how many in the community you want that are renters as opposed to owners? And I know that in these communities that you're developing, it's 100% rent. But is there any thought or want or need to have a community nearby that are owners? Is there any thought in that?
So yeah, it's a great question. We do sit in several master plan communities, these built where we're talking 1,000, 2,000 homes, right? And there's different price points. There's a starter home subdivision, there's a Quinn rental subdivision, there's a move up home subdivision, there might be an apartment, building or two. So we do sit well in those. We have no plans to sort of do a development on that scale. I will say something we have looked at is obviously the cost of the home is important, particularly in today's environment. So how can we reduce the cost of the home, therefore making the rent more reasonable and affordable for our resident? And that means you buy more land. And it doesn't make sense to build a 700 home community just to take it to an extreme because
Right.
then you've got leasing issues and all of that. Having said that, if we can find enough land, I'm going to make this up, 100 acres, and we can build our 250 home subdivision and sell off to the grocer or to a hotel company or to a medical office building where you're spreading the cost of that development, right? The horizontal work over a larger parcel of land, that can make some sense. So that's something we're exploring.
Yeah. So talking about the horizontal work, typically when you build a single family community, you got to put in all the utilities, sewer lines, storm drains,
Yep.
um,
Streets, all of that.
water, yeah, all the streets. So, but in a typical situation, once the project's complete, at least out in Oregon, I know that the builder will then have to put up like a 1 year maintenance bond that says, hey, look, if something falls apart in these utilities, and we come back and we'll fix them or have the money to do so. But the streets and all that are turned over to the municipality. In these master communities, since it's basically especially if it's a single plot, are those yours or are those the municipalities?
No, you're right. In those instances where it's a single plat and it's all 200 homes are on one tax, we typically are responsible for maintaining the roads and the sewer and all of that. And we don't do any septic, just
Right.
for ease. So to your point, yes, we would be responsible In some cases, you can deed that back to the municipality, the infrastructure. They don't typically like to do that because then they're on the hook, right? So that's just if you've developed the project from day one, you have some comfort that the streets are, on solid base and the sewer and stormwater is going to operate. And then obviously the utilities are put in by the utility company, so they maintain those, if you will.
Got it. So in the model you're doing, you talked about the income of the residents is average 5 times rent as opposed to 3 times in a multifamily property.
Yep.
How do the numbers overall compare to like a multifamily property as far as from an investor standpoint? Um, do you
So I would say our margins probably are not as high yet as a multi property. Typical margin in our business is mid 60s, right? 65% margin, so 35%. Um, and
expense?
then, yeah, in multi, it's a little bit higher. It's probably 70, particularly in these large, 500 unit multifamily buildings, just because you're spreading the costs over more units. Having said that, our rents are typically more than most apartment buildings are 1 and 2 bedrooms. They may have 10 or 15% of 3 bedrooms. So our rents on average are higher. And as we get to scale, our costs come down, right? Your typical, what we call non-controllable costs, and the highest percentage of that 35% is property taxes and insurance. Insurance been a little crazy these last few years just because of all the storms and fires and such. So, but going forward, the margins in our business, we think we can get to those multifamily margins, and then with a higher rent, your return on investment is going to be greater.
I would think the one thing that would be the significant differentiator. I mean, obviously we talked about those streets and stuff, but if you own an apartment complex, those are yours as well. But just in the when you get to the 25-year point, you know, roofs, in that the number of roofs you have as opposed to like a multi-story apartment building, uh, would be substantially less as far as roofing goes. And I don't know, do you have like a reserve? I mean, this is all brand new or
Yeah,
relatively
it's all
new.
brand new, but to
Yeah,
your point, we underwrite to a capital reserve
yeah,
per on a per home basis over, let's say the 10-year hold that we model. You're not going to need a roof in 10 years, but at
right,
some point you will. And all
right.
of these folks who have bought, 25, 30-year-old homes, even if they replace the roof when they purchase the home, you still have to account for at some point, to your point, you're going to have to replace it. So we do sort of take that into account. The technology and the building materials today are much better and longer lasting than they were, say, even 10 or 15 years ago. And the codes are much more strict in terms of how you build the house. So they typically last longer. But yes, you do have to account for some sort of capital reserve.
No, it's an interesting model. And like I shared with you before, I've actually 1031 into a DST that has one of these, and you know, every month the check shows up, so I've been happy about that. But clearly the model of renting is not just an apartment building. And I think when the financial crisis back in the '08, that kind of awoke the Wall Street and the hedge funds and all that to recognize, hey, it's reoccurring cash flow, and they were buying them at a super low price where they couldn't lose. But it's interesting that another model.
Well, and today, right, the underpinning is also, I mean, if you take our home and compare it to the exact same home, I'm talking the exact same home for sale, we're about 50 to 60% cheaper on a monthly basis for the resident than owning the same home.
Than
And
buying them.
that's going to drive this business for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes
I mean,
sense.
historically, since World War II, rent's been about 15% less than owning. So it's only in this run up of both interest rates, home price appreciation, and cost, sort of a triple whammy, that we've become, a lot more affordable on a monthly basis.
Yeah. No, it's certainly fascinating. I mean, it's a cool model, uh, and I get it all. I'm kind of curious. What is the for a 200 unit development? We talked a little bit about you've got a financing facility that can get you all the way from the entitled all the way to the operations. But as far as a down payment, what kind of numbers does it take? I mean, is this basically like a developer that's coming in to do a development? I mean, because that seems to me there, you start with raw land, that's got a price, but then you kind of incrementally grow
Well,
as you
let's just
build
do, I
up.
mean, we could do some
Yeah,
really rough math.
yeah.
200 home subdivision, I'm going to say $350,000 a home cost, because that's what it costed us, $70 million, right? So
Hmm.
real. And if you're going to put a loan on it, prudent loan would be, I don't know, 65%. So that means it's a pretty big 25, 24, $25 million equity check. Now that goes out not all at once, but the land's a significant portion. So these are not for sort of small investors. Having said that, you just did a small community, right? You invested through a DST. You can find a 10 or 25, 50 home community that's a lot more reasonably a reasonable investment, where 10 people can kind of pool their money and do one of these things, and enjoy the benefits of it.
Yeah. Interesting. Hey, Richard, if we could, I'd like to shift gears here for a second. As I've mentioned, by day I'm an insurance broker. And as such, I work with my clients to assess risk and determine what to do with the risk. And there's three strategies we typically consider. We first look to see if there's a way we can avoid the risk. And if that's not an option, we look to see if there's a way we can minimize the risk. And if we cannot avoid nor minimize, we look to see if we can transfer the risk. And that's what an insurance policy is. It's a risk transfer vehicle. And as such, I like to ask my guests if they can look at their own situation. Could be the Fed rates, the demand, uh, the political winds, whether it be local or national or international, whatever it is that you identify and consider to be the biggest risk. And again, for clarification, while I am an insurance broker, I'm not necessarily looking for an insurance related answer. And so if you're
So you're
willing,
asking what keeps me up at night. Is that it,
that's
Dan?
right. Richard Ross, what is the biggest risk?
So people in this business typically would say interest rates, and certainly the elevated level of rates has been a factor. My opinion on interest rates is, as long as they're stable, I can deal with them. Like, I can price my product, if you will. What keeps me up at night today, and you sort of alluded to it, is regulation and legislation, particularly anti-renter bias. And that's mostly local. I'm talking rent control. I'm talking prohibition against renting because somehow we are impeding people from buying homes. The facts don't bear that out. But you can get a law passed that says you can only rent 5 homes in a 100 home subdivision. Well, that's a problem for me. It's a problem for you probably as a owner of rental property. So that's would be the biggest risk today is a sort of a myopic approach and an anti-renter bias that a lot of local municipalities have.
Yeah. No, a couple of angry people with pitchforks, and next thing you know, you're sitting there with the mayor, and I've been in the angry mob setting
Yeah,
there,
and
and,
I've sat with many mayors trying to explain what we do and how we provide, again, a reasonably priced alternative so that people can live in their communities. But that's a
yeah,
talk for another show.
not in my backyard. That's
Yes,
the
exactly.
I got it. Hey, Richard, where can the listeners go if they'd like to learn more or connect with you?
So to connect with Quinn, they can go to live, L-I-V-E hyphen Quinn, Quinn.com. If they want to know more about the business in the industry in general, go to the National Rental Home Council. They have a great website with a lot of materials, all free and available to download, that talk about this business and how it works.
Got it. Well, Richard Ross, I can't say thanks enough for taking the time to talk today. I've enjoyed it. I've learned a lot, and I look forward to doing it again soon.
Thanks, Darren. Appreciate you having me.
All right. For our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.
You're listening to CREPN Radio for influential commercial real estate professionals. For more information on this or any of our guests, like us on Facebook, CREPN Radio.